This is Movietone.
This collection of cinema newsreel reports of disasters, accidents and disruptions on Britain's railways covers the period from 1914 to 1975 and is taken from the extensive archives of Movietone News. Where these are preserved, the reports are presented here with their original soundtracks. The earliest film in this compilation depicts the aftermath of a fatal accident on the 18th of June 1914 on the Highland Railway at Carr Bridge near Aviemore. A passenger train from Perth to Inverness was crossing the bridge as it collapsed and fell into the flooded waters below, taking with it 2 carriages of the train. 5 passengers were drowned in the carriage, which fell on its side in the burn, its roof being torn off and washed away in over 19 feet of floodwater. A signal passed at danger and excessive speed by the engine crew led to the derailment of the LMS's 11:30 a.m. express passenger train from London Euston to Glasgow at a crossover just south of Leighton Buzzard Station on the 22nd of March 1931. The driver and fireman of Royal Scot class locomotive number 6114 Coldstream Guardsman were killed in the crash, along with the dining car cook and 3 passengers. 26 others were injured. Despite receiving extensive damage in the crash, the Royal Scot locomotive was subsequently repaired and put back in service. The 3 leading vehicles of the 14-coach train, 2 first-class carriages and a kitchen car, were completely wrecked, the wooden coach bodies being torn from the underframes and smashed beyond repair. These vehicles were also thrown against 4 horse boxes which were standing in a siding on the left of the train. On the 18th of December 1931 at Dagenham Dock on the Tilbury section of the London, Midland and Scottish Railway, The 9:25 passenger train from London Fenchurch Street to Southend collided in dense fog with 10 stationary wagons and a brake van. The rear portion of a freight train from Brent to West Thurrock, which had become divided due to a breakage of a drawbar. Lying on its side is locomotive number 2139 from the passenger train, a former London, Tilbury and Southend Railway Class 37 442 tank. Of the 250 passengers on the train, one was killed in the leading coach along with the guard of the freight train. A further 85 passengers were also injured, 10 seriously.
The engine left the rails in a cutting and half buried itself in the embankment, dragging the first coach with it. 4 people were killed and 20 injured, 12 of them seriously. The train was carrying many passengers, and it was indeed fortunate that it did not crash into the river, which runs parallel to the lines only a few yards away. For had it done so, the death roll must have been far heavier. The scene of the train wreck at Eagles Cliff Junction near Stockton. On its side, the coach, in which 40 children had miraculous escapes when the Liverpool to Newcastle Express crashed into the luggage compartment at its rear. The children, who were returning to Middlesbrough by a local train after a day at the seaside, were all in the fore part of the coach. The local train was crossing the main track when the express approached, and an appalling catastrophe was only averted by the prompt action of the express driver in applying his brakes, warned by a station official who ran down the track waving a red flag. As it was, the express sheared and grazed the sides of the local train, as well as those of its own coaches, but it had slowed down sufficiently at the time of collision to avoid a more terrible disaster. The express engine smashed the front part of its boiler, but it was not derailed and was able to be towed away by a breakdown train on its own wheels.
When there is a train smash, one immediate question is in everybody's mind. Was there any loss of life? Fortunately, the crash which occurred at West Hampstead, for all the confusion of the wreckage, involved no casualties, for it was a goods train which left the points and charged a mound in front of the signal box. Vans and wagons piled themselves upon the engine, but the driver and fireman had jumped clear and were uninjured.
Welwyn Garden City Station in Hertfordshire is the scene of one of the worst disasters in the history of British railways. An aerial view shows how terrible was the impact when at midnight a northbound express collided at high speed with the rear of a passenger train on the same line, strewing wreckage along a quarter of a mile of track. 8 carriages were telescoped and overturned, ripped, twisted and smashed to matchwood. An early estimate puts the number of deaths at 15, while many more are injured. A terrible casualty list to record. It is difficult to imagine and impossible to exaggerate the ghastly scenes immediately following the tragic smash. But the first pictures of the disaster, showing the aftermath of the stark tragedy, can only arouse feelings of the most heartfelt sympathy for the bereaved. Debris is burnt up, The clearing of the line continues, and after the injured have been taken to hospital, engine and coaches are towed away.
It is a sad truism that disasters never come singly, and following close on the terrible pit explosion in Wales comes news of the railway smash at Winwick Junction, near Warrington in Lancashire. The accident occurred on Friday evening when the London to Blackpool Express ran into a slow train from Warrington and Wigan. 12 fatalities and over 40 injuries are recorded as a result of the collision, almost all the casualties occurring in the first passenger compartment of the express. It is the second serious railway accident involving passengers on a British line this month, and heartfelt sympathies extended to the bereaved.
The debris of the head-on collision between two passenger trains outside Cumberland Street Station, Glasgow, is evidence of the terrific impact which occurred in Britain's first fatal railway accident involving passengers this year. Wrecked coaches overhang the parapet wall of an embankment. It is thought that one of the trains jumped the points at a network of rails, and it is tragic to record that 8 fatalities occurred and over 40 people were injured. Deep sympathy is expressed for the bereaved.
An astonishing mass of wreckage is piled up at King's Langley in Hertfordshire as a result of one of the most remarkable railway smashes for years. No less than 4 goods trains were involved. The trouble began with a comparatively mild crash during the night between a meat train and a milk train. Then 2 more goods trains ran into them. With engines and trucks smashed, tangled and scattered all over the permanent way, many lines are blocked and traffic to the north seriously disorganized. It is sad to have to record the death of one of the drivers. 3 others were injured. Only the prompt action of one of the men prevented a 5th train, the Aberdeen Express, from crashing into the debris. Every effort is at once made to ensure the renewal of scheduled traffic between London and the north.
There was a bit of trouble on the line. That's how the guard is reported to have described the accident to a milk train near Winchfield, Hampshire. The goods express came roaring through the cutting at 60 miles an hour and plunged headlong into 1,000 tons of earth. You can see how the landslide caused by the heavy rains had uprooted the right-hand track and twisted the rails. And that's how the trouble was caused. Amazing that no lives were lost. Looking at the scene soon after the smash, it seems more than a bit of trouble, with coaches smashed and overturned and the line blocked. Breakdown gangs were quickly on the spot, working hard to open the line to traffic. 2 of the 4 lines were soon cleared, and next day normal services were running over the whole track.
Another disaster leading to the loss of 2 lives and many injuries is the wrecking of the Penzance London Express in the early morning near Swindon. The train collided with a van and trucks which had broken away from a goods train. The impact was terrific. The result, tragedy. The scene, overturned carriages, debris and blocked line tell the story.
The scene of a terribly sad railway accident is recorded at Sleaford, Lincolnshire. Rounding a bend, the York to Lowestoft train left the line and crashed into a platelayer's hut where 5 men were eating their lunch. 4 of them lost their lives. The 5th is seriously injured. 5 passengers were slightly hurt. The work of clearing the track continues into the night. Here is the coach that actually did the damage, and beneath it, all that is left of the hut smashed to matchwood. A tragedy that stands out in strong relief
owing to the rarity of such accidents in Britain. The express roars past the scene of tragedy. Just outside Langley in Buckinghamshire, a slow passenger train from Oxford came into collision with a goods train, with the result that a guard was fatally injured and 7 others hurt. Both engines and several coaches and wagons were derailed and piled up in a mass of wreckage. There's a railway crash in the rush hours of early morning. A collision near Battersea Park Station results in terrible tragedy. 12 lives being lost and some 50 people being injured. The work of rescue and salvage is handicapped by the fact that the accident took place on a viaduct, confining the operations to the limited space of the track. Both trains were electric, one a local train from Coulsdon smashing at high speed into a London Bridge to Victoria train which was stationary. In the havoc it is difficult to distinguish which train is which, but 4 coaches were telescoped and the wreckage blocked all lines. Poignant scenes were witnessed as the rescue work proceeded, and the fact that the Coulsdon train was crowded with city workers added to the grim list of casualties. Fortunately, rare on British Railways are fatal accidents, and the disaster at Swanley, which involved 4 deaths, is a distressing exception. A train from Margate returning via Ashford to London ran off the main track into a siding and crashed into an empty coach in front of an electrical transformer. As the crane gets busy clearing the debris, it begins to be apparent that the empty coach saved a good many lives. For if the train had dashed head-on into the transformer, the terrible danger of fire and electrocution would have been added.
Castle Kerry, the tragic scene on the main line between Edinburgh and Glasgow as the snow flakes down upon twisted wreckage. Compartments smashed like matchwood, coaches pancaked above one another, engines dug into the embankment beside the track. To reconstruct the melancholy story, a train from Dundee was halted just beyond Castle Kerry station when the express from Edinburgh crashed into it at high speed. Both trains were crowded with passengers. The dead in this terrible accident, number 35, the injured nearly 100. Such mournful occurrences are fortunately rare on British Railways, as is evidenced by the fact that this is the worst tragedy since the Gretna Green disaster of 1915. But that doesn't lessen the suffering of those bereaved in this ordeal. To them, our sympathy goes out. While the wreckage is cleared away, survivors reach their homes with grim stories.
Yes, I was in the second coach. After the impact, the train wobbled from side to side, and then our coach was lifted bodily onto the one in front, which was already on top of the engine. By that time, the compartment was in smithereens. Next thing I realised, I was alone among the debris.
That was Mr. James Chalmers of Glasgow, then Private Nisbet of the Cameronians.
This is the warmest Christmas I have experienced. Nevertheless, I have been very fortunate, as one of my friends was killed in the disaster.
On the front page, a tragedy. Lit by flares to aid searchers is the wreckage of 2 trains. The engines crashed head-on. One of them, the London to Bradford Express, which jumped the points at 70 miles an hour near Bedford. The other train, fortunately empty, was drawn up on the track into which the express swerved. Now by daylight they are removing the debris of the smashed and ripped coaches. While it is sad to record 2 deaths and 7 other serious casualties, it is amazing that so many of the 600 passengers escaped. Casualties in the recent underground crash are unfortunately far from imaginary, and the victims number 6 dead and 60 injured, all in this wrecked train. The Underground Railway of London has carried 500 million passengers annually without serious accident by an automatic safety system regarded as utterly proof against collision. But by a 10 million to 1 chance, 2 trains crashed with these terrible consequences. While ambulances remove the stretcher cases, oxygen cylinders are carried down for the succor of those still imprisoned in the wreckage. On the snow-covered railway line near Hatfield, a tangled mass of wreckage marks the site of a disastrous collision. 3 trains, all bound for King's Cross, were involved. A train from Peterborough crashing into the 825 from Cambridge, which was standing stationary behind the 734. One life was lost and many people were injured. The difficult work of clearing the line illustrates the havoc caused by the crash. Many passengers had amazing escapes. In the Fens, that flat country where level crossings are the rule, a pitiable scene meets the eye just beyond Hillgate Station. It's the wreck of the London to Hunstanton train lying strewn across the track in a tangled mass. The cause of the accident was a lorry carrying hay. The locomotive collided with the lorry as it passed through an open level crossing. Engine and first few coaches left the rails and, plying through the sleepers, scraped along the side of a goods train stationary in the siding. The goods train prevented the express from turning completely over, but the impact between the 2 trains caused 4 deaths and a number of injuries. 1 or 2 discoveries among the tragic wreckage, a wheel of the shattered lorry, and the engine driver's cap lying where it fell between the rails. The driver was fortunately unhurt.
At Bletchley Station on the evening of the 13th of October 1939, a shunting engine, which was in the process of attaching a parcels van to the rear of the 7:30 p.m. Euston to Inverness train, was run into at considerable speed by the following 7:50 p.m. express from Euston to Stranraer. 4 people were killed.
Landslides have occurred in many parts of Britain, and one, a particularly serious fall on the railway near Watford, caused loss of life. Thousands of tons of chalk and clay which rolled down the cutting in front of a train from Northampton have now to be cleared away, and so have the carriages. The tragedy took place near the entrance to a tunnel, and local lines were blocked for many hours. Railway accident in England. Here are some views of the damage done to a London-bound express from Liverpool near the capital. By an extraordinary chance, it's reported, the train hit a barrow that had just fallen on the line, with the result that the engine was derailed, the front carriage smashed, and the next 2 telescoped. There were a good many casualties, I'm sorry to say, and at least 5 fatalities. Train smashes have always been news, I'm afraid, but most of those that occurred during the war were naturally hushed up. Now there's been one in North Wales. A mail train crashed into a 40-foot ravine after a canal running parallel with the railway had broken its banks and washed away the ballast from under the line. The train happened to be carrying about £200,000 for old age pensions and army allowances, but the really tragic result of the crash and the ensuing fire was the death of the driver and injuries to the fireman and guard. This is Movie Turn. Leslie Mitchell reporting. The Bourne End train crash was one of the worst for many years. Scenes at the place of disaster, which occurred when the Perth to Euston Express left the rails, show clearly enough why the casualties reached such a high total. The engine plunged down the embankment, dragging tender and several coaches with it. Driver and fireman were killed. 5 other coaches were smashed and piled high in a tangle of wreckage, which made the work of rescue in many cases extremely difficult. The Red Cross, NFS and local hospital staffs, as well as American troops, worked hard and continuously for many hours, extricating casualties and clearing the debris. The train had left Scotland with some 700 passengers. Comparatively early estimates put the death roll at about 40, with the number of injured higher still. A special inquiry will be held into the cause of this very grave accident, which has resulted in so much distress and bereavement. Almost an epidemic of railway crashes has recently filled the news. This was the scene near Pinner Road after two metropolitan trains had collided in the dense fog that covered the capital. Some loss of life and many injuries resulted. Then there was the even more serious accident at Lichfield, Trent Valley. A fish train special on the Fleetwood to London run crashed into a passenger train which had stopped in the station. Afterwards, it looked like an incident in a blitz. The casualty list, including about a score of fatalities, only added to the resemblance. It's obviously true, of course, that the secrecy that shrouded railway accidents throughout the war inevitably brings the present disasters into greater prominence. But loss of life or limb is no less poignant and harrowing in peace than in war. And it's to be hoped that inquiry and investigation will lead to a redoubling of precautions against a recurrence of accidents on railway. There was yet another disaster at Cadley, near Marlborough in Wiltshire. Here a number of soldiers lost their lives when part of the ammunition train they were unloading blew up. Even after this tragedy, the situation remained dangerous, for the countryside was spattered with live shells, mines and detonators. Here the local commandant, Colonel Heron, is seen investigating the situation with the GOC. This affair might have been even more tragic. About 100 tons of ammo went up, but it's reported there were about another 500 tons which were not affected. Evacuated people were soon back. They were eager to get home, but in any case, the army made a quick job of cleaning up.
The Croydon rail crash, which occurred during thick fog, was the most tragic accident of this kind so near to London for very many years. The heavy death roll, which early reports put at nearly 30, was due largely to the fact that both trains were crowded with people on their way to business. Over 100 were injured, some very seriously. All possible help was immediately forthcoming from nearby residents before some 50 ambulances arrived from many neighbourhoods. The Croydon crash stands out all the more starkly for the very reason that railway travel is, generally speaking, so free from tragedy.
Driver error and excessive speed were again to blame for the derailment of the 11:50 a.m. express from Edinburgh to King's Cross at Goswick between Berwick and Newcastle on the LNER's East Coast Main Line on the 26th of October 1947. The train was nearly full, with about 420 passengers in 15 coaches. Travelling too fast over some points, the train engine, Gresley A3 Class Pacific number 66, Merry Hampton, along with 8 of the leading passenger carriages of the 15-coach train, careered off the rails and went down the low bank into the ditch and field alongside the track. 27 passengers and one of the train attendants lost their lives in the crash.
When the Glasgow to London passenger express stopped near Winsford in Cheshire after a soldier on board had pulled the communication cord, the mail train from Glasgow ploughed into it. Over a score of people were killed and many others were injured. A glance at the wreckage of the train shows why this tragic accident involved such heavy loss of life. Mail bags are seen being recovered from the mass of debris after all the injured had been taken to hospital. The incident of the communication cord and the fact that the mail train was unable to be halted in time to avoid the crash are two unusual features of a grim accident requiring the most careful investigation. The great fog not only did its best to keep shipping tied up, it made things very unpleasant for everybody. It wasn't only in London. On the contrary, the fog extended over most of the country and half Europe as well. If it wasn't of record duration, it certainly lasted quite long enough, thank you very much. The fog had tragic results also. One example being the train crash on a viaduct near Stockport on the main London-Manchester line. 4 people were killed and 60 injured in the collision.
The The Irish mail from Holyhead to Euston became a mass of distorted wreckage when at 3 o'clock on a Sunday morning it ran into another locomotive on the same track. The two engines were telescoped into one another, leading coaches were flung astride the railroad, and rear coaches derailed. The crash occurred on the North Wales coast where the railway runs alongside the sea. There were 520 passengers aboard, and the marvel was that the casualties weren't more severe. It seems incredible that of so great a number, only 6 people were killed and 35 injured. For all that, it's a tragic occurrence, and public sympathy goes out to the bereaved. Fortunately, such disasters as the rail crash at Penmaen Moor are rare. His Majesty was certainly looking very much better when he left the train at Ballater and inspected the Guard of Honour mounted by the Seaforths. The King was accompanied by the Queen and also by Prince Charles and Princess Anne. The royal party, on their way to enjoy a holiday at Balmoral, were shortly to be joined by Princess Elizabeth, Princess Margaret and Prince Philip. As usual, on August Bank holiday, the people of Britain felt a strong urge to get away from it all. Those at Liverpool thought it a fine idea to take a sea trip to forget their worries. Those in London crowded the stations. They couldn't get away from the big city quick enough. But this year's holiday was marred by a tragic accident when an excursion train from Brighton to Portsmouth collided with a stationary train at Ford near Arundel. 8 people, including 4 children, were killed, and about 50, of whom 1 has since died, were injured. This holiday season disaster shocked the country.
This is Movietone. Lionel Gamlin reporting. The Liverpool to Euston Express, which was derailed just beyond the tunnel near Weedon, Northamptonshire, resulted in tragic loss of life and many injuries. Aerial views of the scene, taken soon after its occurrence, give a painfully clear impression of the accident. Coaches had been smashed and hurled over the embankment, and in a field beside the line were many vehicles brought up to help in the rescue. Early reports said that something went wrong while the train was in the tunnel, but of course a full inquiry will be held. Meanwhile, deep sympathy is extended to all those bereaved by this very grim disaster.
Three trains were involved in the appalling railway disaster at Harrow and Wealdstone. Each was full of people, and the station was also crowded, with the result that British Railways have suffered their worst accident. The clock stopped at the time of the crash. While the Tring to Euston train was standing in the station, the night express from Perth ran into it, causing fearful damage and chaos. Then the Euston to Manchester express collided with the wreckage from the first collision. The scene has been described by an eyewitness as being like a battlefield. Certainly no exaggeration, for casualties were on a terrible scale. Bandages were hastily improvised on the spot, and everything possible was done by all present to rescue and aid the injured. It was a grim and difficult task in the dreadful conditions prevailing. American troops from a nearby headquarters were quickly on the spot with invaluable blood plasma, but many of the injured were trapped in the wreckage. Their number could not yet be computed, nor was it known at this time how many had lost their lives in the tragedy. One thing, however, was already certain: the disaster was very great, the casualties very large in number. The whole country was shocked by the news, and everywhere the deepest sympathy was felt and expressed for the bereaved and for all who had been hurt.
It was not far from Stratford Station, in the tunnel section that lies between it and Leighton, that the tragic train collision recently occurred. Help from many sources was quickly on the spot, and all reports tell of the heroic work done and great endurance displayed by everybody taking part in the rescue of the injured. Some 40 people received treatment for minor hurts, while 8 more seriously injured were kept in hospital. 9 people lost their lives in this disaster on the Central Line, the worst accident in the history of the London Underground Railways. The system, which deals with about 2 million passengers a day, has always been renowned for its safety. At Leighton next day, travellers had to go by bus, and very long queues naturally resulted. The cause of this accident has yet to be discovered, but when they got the damaged coaches out, it was plain to see what a fearful smash-up there'd been when the Epping train ran into the Hainault one, which was halted in the tunnel.
A 30-foot gap in the Irk Valley Viaduct near Manchester, one coach of the electric train from Bury fell 80 feet into the stream. It had been in collision with a Manchester to Bacup steam train with tragic results. Most of the casualties occurred in the coach that fell from the viaduct. Some 50 people are reported to have been in it, but its steel construction is thought to have saved life. This very grim accident, however, was responsible for at least 10 fatalities, and about 60 people were injured. Help was quickly on the spot, and everything possible was done. Nationwide sympathy has been extended to the bereaved and to all those who suffered in this tragic accident.
Sutton Coalfield Station was closed and empty when the York to Bristol Express was derailed there. But all possible help was quickly on the spot, and the work of rescue went on through the night. When the engine left the track, some reports say it jumped the points, 9 out of 10 coaches piled up into this terrifying mass of wreckage. The train was carrying about 300 passengers at the time. Railwaymen were quick to avert another disaster by succeeding in halting the Birmingham to York Express, 200 yards short of the wreckage. An early casualty list put the fatalities at 16 and injured, many of them very seriously, at over 40. Deep sympathy for those bereaved and all who suffered in this tragic accident has everywhere been expressed. This is what happened when the Manchester to Marylebone Express was derailed near Barby, about 2 miles from Rugby. The train is believed to have jumped the points, and all but the last 2 coaches were hurled off the track. Tragically, the driver lost his life, and the fireman and 1 passenger were seriously injured. Of 250 passengers, only about 20 were hurt, an amazing escape for the majority. This is Movietone. Geoffrey Sumner reporting. When the Britannia-class locomotive Polar Star was derailed near Didcot, soon after crossing from the main line to a loop, 4 coaches plunged down the embankment after it. The train was an excursion from Wales. Immediate fatalities were 10, and the number of injured about 100. Nearly 300 passengers were aboard the train, and many miraculous escapes were reported, including that of the engine driver and the fireman. These pictures reveal the extent of the disaster. There are the points which possibly caused the accident. It took hours before the main line was cleared.
At Luton Station on the evening of the 22nd of December 1955, the 6:45 p.m. train from St Pancras to Leicester was leaving this station as 3 passengers attempted to board it. One of them got into difficulties and the guard promptly stopped the train with the rear 3 coaches still at the platform. In the meantime, the following 7:10 p.m. express from St Pancras to Derby passed the Luton South distance signal at caution and the home signal at danger, and collided with the rear of the Leicester train at about 20 miles per hour. The impact partially telescoped the rear two coaches of the Leicester train, which was standing with the brakes off. The leading three compartments of the rear coach and the guard's van and adjoining passenger compartment of the next coach were destroyed. One passenger was killed and 23 were injured, of whom 12 were detained in hospital.
It was about a mile from Welwyn Garden City that the night express from Aberdeen crashed into the rear of a local train. Many coaches of the express were derailed and flung over onto their sides. But almost miraculously, there was only one fatality among the total of about 600 passengers travelling in the two trains. The lines were blocked till the next day, and the cause of the collision, potentially a very grave disaster, awaits close investigation.
On the 9th of February 1957, a freight train from Buxton to Hartley, Warrington, comprising 33 loaded wagons and a brake van, got out of control as it was descending a steep incline and collided violently with the rear of a freight train from Rowsley to Edgeley Stockport, which was passing through Chapel-on-la Frith station. The initial cause of the accident was a failure of a joint in the pipe leading to the driver's steam brake valve of the 8F class loco hauling the Buxton train. This fracture not only put the engine's brakes out of action, but also filled the cab with scalding steam. The fireman jumped clear in an attempt to apply the wagon brakes. However, the driver bravely remained at his post, warning the signalman at Chapel-on-la-Frith of the approaching runaway. The driver, along with the guard of the Rowsley freight train, were killed in the impact.
You might call this the story of the train that took the wrong turning. It's a goods train that left the main track and entered a siding outside Horsham. Tearing up the rails and crashing through the buffers, the engine was only halted in its mad career by a road bridge. The driver and fireman were unhurt, but the engine was livid. It too wanted to be liberated, to get way off the beaten track for a nice, quiet holiday.
On the 17th of June 1957, the 1:30 p.m. express passenger train from Euston to Glasgow Central, the Midday Scot, was derailed whilst travelling over a trailing crossing at Uddingston Junction near Glasgow. The fifth coach and 5 of the 7 behind it were derailed, and the last 2 were severely damaged when they swung to the left some distance beyond the crossing and collided with wagons standing in a siding. The rear part of the 11th coach was badly damaged on the compartment side as it swung against the wagons loaded with rails, tearing away the side. 1 passenger was killed and 4 were injured.
This is Movietone. Geoffrey Shirley reporting. It happened after 6 o'clock in the evening in thick fog. The worst railway accident in the history of the southern region, and one of the worst in the history of British railways.
A steam train from London to Ramsgate crashed into the rear of an electric train to Hayes, which was stationary between St John's and Lewisham stations. The collision wasn't all, for a bridge, the Nunhead flyover, was also involved in the crash, and it collapsed onto the last coach of the steam train. All through the night, rescue workers toiled by the light of flares to extricate the living, the injured, and the dead. The trains had been full of businessmen, rush-hour travellers, and Christmas shoppers. Casualties were very heavy. Over 70 deaths were soon reported, and the toll was expected to be even greater. When dawn broke through the fog, we were given a few eyewitness accounts from people living near the scene who'd helped the injured.
And did you help?
Yes, they brought the wounded in here. Those that weren't too very badly wounded, because the others went on stretchers.
Then a fire engine tore by and I came down the road. They were talking about getting the people down this wall through ladders. But being a gate the other end, I rushed up there and opened the gate and we got them down that way, up and down the 20-foot embankment and through the gate.
And you took them into your house?
The walking casualties, yes, we took into the house, bathed them and bandaged them the best we could.
The frightful pile-up on the line was now a little clearer to see, and looking at it, the reason for the heavy casualty list became obvious. To all the bereaved and to all who suffered in this appalling tragedy, the deepest sympathy is everywhere expressed.
Homeward bound in the fog from Fenchurch Street, a rush-hour train to Shoeburyness runs into a stationary one at Dagenham in Essex. And within this crazy distortion of wreckage, at least 10 people lost their lives. Every available fireman was called in to help clear the debris and help rescue workers with the injured. Nearly 90 people were hurt, some very gravely. Fortunately, this crash was nothing like as bad as the Lewisham disaster in December when 90 people were killed. But in each case, 2 trains were involved and thick fog shrouded the area. Eastbourne Station was completely blocked by the early morning collision in which 5 people were killed and some 30 injured. An express holiday train from Glasgow had run into an electric train waiting in the station before leaving for London. The first 2 coaches of the electric train, thrown onto their sides on the platform, were naturally the point at which most of the casualties occurred. There were many lucky escapes, but it was a horrifying disaster which may only be explained at the inquiry to be held. Easy to imagine, looking at this scene of chaos, what a terrible experience for all concerned this collision must have been.
A triple rail crash blocked main lines from London to the west on the 12th of November 1958 at Highworth Junction, Swindon. A freight train from Bristol to Reading passed at danger the starting signal leading from the goods loop to the main line and became derailed at catch points. The derailed wagons were then struck by an express freight from Fishguard to Paddington, and then by the Paddington to Carmarthen newspaper train travelling in the opposite direction. Fortunately, no one was injured.
Early in the morning, in thick fog, 3 trains entered their own knockout competition. It was at Hitchin in Hertfordshire, the third 3-train pile-up within a few weeks. First, a freight train to Peterborough ran into the back of the goods train in front. It didn't help either them or the schedule. Wagons all over the shop and the line blocked. Then, down from Yorkshire came goods train number 3, hit the lot and completely blocked the other line. Nobody badly hurt, just slap, bang, wallop, and 3 broken trains, 2 messy rail tracks, and 1 big hole in the timetable. A view of foggy England not enjoyed by many people. Our cameraman rose above it while earthbound Britons were struggling manfully to get to their destinations. It was the worst blanket of fog this season so far. I say so far because after the summer of 1959, anything may happen this winter. The fog brought its rail crash, of course. This was at East Ham, a collision between 2 Fenchurch Street trains, both on the way to Shoebury-Ness. The 12 o'clock was standing in the station when the 12:25 crashed into it. At least 13 people were injured. Luckily, there were few passengers in either train. Fog certainly is a menace, by road or rail.
The official inquiry into the accident concluded that the driver of the 12:25 train failed to see the Upton Park starter signal because he was not keeping proper lookout and collided with the rear of the 12 o'clock train at about 15 miles per hour. On the southern region at Borough Market Junction near London Bridge, a signal passed at danger was again the cause of a collision between 3 trains in the afternoon of the 28th of January 1960. The 1 p.m. diesel-electric multiple unit train from Hastings to Charing Cross was travelling on the up local line and was to precede the 2:22 p.m. electric train from Hayes to Charing Cross, following behind on the up through line. Unfortunately, the train from Hayes ran past a red signal and came into sidelong collision with the Hastings train at a converging junction between the up-through and up-local lines. The collision forced the rear end of the leading coach of the Hayes train towards the down line from Charing Cross, and it was struck almost immediately by an electric train heading for Tattenham Corner. Fortunately, the speed of all the trains was slow. 7 passengers, most of whom were in the Hayes train, received slight injuries or suffered from shock.
Story of the train that ran away out of control at Royton, Lancashire. It crashed through buffers, a reinforced wall, across a street and through 3 houses. In the course of its extraordinary escapade, the train lifted an elderly couple in their bed, carried them through 2 walls of their home, and then, as if adding insult to injury, dumped them on the debris. Altogether, 6 people were injured, but only 2 of them badly enough to be detained in hospital. There's to be an inquiry into the affair, of course, and I think I'd have a question to ask if trains started running through my house. Before breakfast, too.
A fatal collision between 2 trains in adverse weather conditions occurred at 6 p.m. on Boxing Day 1962 on the 4-track electrified line between Winsford Station and Coppenhall Junction, just north of Crewe. The 4:45 p.m. Liverpool to Birmingham passenger train, consisting of 8 coaches hauled by an electric locomotive, was struck in the rear by the diesel-hauled 13-coach Glasgow to Euston Express, the Midday Scot. The impact was severe. The coupling between the 7th and 8th coaches of the Birmingham train fractured, and the 8th coach telescoped into the coach ahead for about half its length. 18 passengers lost their lives and 33 others, along with the guard of the Birmingham train, were seriously injured.
5 weeks of frost, even the sea frozen over. Southend Pier surrounded by ice floes. Night after night of temperatures around 3 degrees Fahrenheit, day after day with the mercury well below freezing. Best place to be is home by the far side, waiting for the next power cut. Anyway, there's enough gas. Oh well. In general, though, the priorities in a big freeze are fuel and transport. In spite of tremendous efforts to keep the lines clear, many long-distance travellers have been over 8 hours late. In fact, some trains never got there at all. Bogged down in a snowdrift, a steam loco soon gets frozen pipes. But to keep us all from freezing up and industry from grinding to a halt, an emergency plan has been bringing coal supplies to power stations in London, Bristol and Leicester. More often than not, the coal is frozen solid. We offer a vote of thanks to the blokes who've had to unload the trucks in freezing weather. Along with other industries, power stations are often fed by inland waterways. With these arteries blocked, there was an extra load on road and railway.
The winter of 1963 was the coldest for more than 200 years. It began abruptly just before Christmas in 1962, and the long, bitterly cold spell didn't fully relax its grip until the 4th of March 1963. This film depicts the efforts to dig out a train hauled by a Peak-class diesel-electric locomotive trapped in a snowdrift on the Settle to Carlisle line.
The 710 from Fenchurch Street to Shoeburyness after jumping the rails at Elm Park near Romford. After plunging along the line for a quarter of a mile, tearing up rails and sleepers and ballast. Its bogies were torn away, ripping into the iron parapet of a bridge. Driver's cab, where Ernest Wybrew lost his life here on the fastest stretch of the line. William Rayner, a railway linesman, also died. 2 dead and 15 injured. Driver Wybrew's last words were, "I felt the train hit something on the line." If he was right, if the train did hit some obstruction, young vandals may be responsible. Apparently it's a favorite pastime, dropping concrete blocks and bars of iron onto this part of the track. If that was the cause, we hope those responsible will see these pictures. Investigations started immediately after the derailment. We only hope they reveal the cause of the accident soon.
Extensive damage was caused to the permanent way and signal box by the derailment of an empty coaching stock train on the 23rd of December 1966 at Islip Street Junction near Kentish Town Station on the St Pancras to Leicester main line. The train of 13 empty coaches was travelling from St Pancras to Cricklewood carriage sidings at about 30 miles per hour when part of the brake rigging on the leading bogie of the fourth coach struck and operated the facing point lock movement at a crossover at Islip Street Junction, derailing 3 coaches across the up-fast line. The signal box was hit and partially demolished by the 6th coach. At this time, the 748 Radlett to St Pancras diesel multiple unit train, a 4-car set with about 150 passengers on board, was approaching Kentish Town on the up-fast line and hit the derailed coaches, which were underneath the bridge carrying Islip Street over the railway. 19 passengers suffered shock and minor injuries.
Sunday at Hither Green, South London. At least 53 people died when a London-bound train from Hastings jumped the rails, overturning 10 coaches. The crash occurred less than 2 miles from the spot where the Lewisham rail disaster took place 10 years ago, in which 90 people died. One carriage came off the track and was hit by following coaches. Many were trapped inside and underneath the wreckage. The tangled, twisted metal echoes the scene of 10 years ago as firemen cut their way through. A rope up the embankment to help rescue workers negotiate the slippery mud. Local residents reacted to the crisis with spontaneous and untiring offers of help. As our camera crew took these pictures, more than 100 people were known to have been injured, as well as 53 certain fatalities. Daylight brought a new, more terrible dimension to the disaster. Shattered coaches flung off the line like toys. This is the worst year for fatal accidents on our railways since 1957, the year of that fearful Lewisham disaster. A broken rail is thought to have been the cause. Tangled wreckage at the scene of one of the latest train crash disasters in Britain. Here, 3 miles from Chester, a boy and a girl were killed and 30 other children injured when their school excursion train plunged off the rails at 60 miles an hour. In this carriage, 6 youngsters were trapped while rescue teams cut their way through to them. Official investigations have begun into both accidents.
Near Eltham-Well Hall Station in South London, a train disaster for hundreds of day trippers. This train, or what remains of it, left the rails on a bend, and this was the outcome. The diesel engine and 10 coaches ploughed for 120 yards through rail lines, earth and coal before coming to a stop. Of the 380 people of a railwaymen's club returning from an annual trip to Margate, 4 have died, and 130 others are now in hospital. For those involved in the train disaster, what started out to be a happy day by the sea has ended in tragedy.
On the 10th of September 1973, IRA bombs exploded at 2 of the capital's mainline stations, injuring 14 people and bringing chaos to central London. The first incident occurred at King's Cross just before 12:30, when without any warning, a youth threw a bag containing 2 to 3 pounds of explosives into the old booking hall. The explosion caused extensive but superficial damage, shattering the windows and hurling baggage trolleys and passengers through the air. 6 people were injured. The perpetrator escaped into the crowd and was never caught. The second explosion came at 1:10 at Euston, just minutes after the Press Association received a telephoned warning from a man with an Irish accent. The similar-sized bomb shattered a snack bar at the station, injuring a further 8 people. The police had only 3 minutes to clear the area and were in the process of evacuating passengers when the blast went off. London's other stations were put on high alert, such as here at Waterloo, with Scotland Yard receiving more than 100 hoax telephone calls throughout that day. Ten passengers lost their lives and 94 were injured in the 70-mile-an-hour derailment of a train from Paddington to Oxford near West Ealing, just after 5:30 in the evening of the 19th of December 1973. The train consisted of 11 British Railways Mark I coaches, hauled by Class 52 diesel hydraulic locomotive number 1007 Western Talisman. Shortly after leaving Paddington, an insecurely fastened battery box door on the near side of the locomotive fell open. After fouling a number of line-side structures, the door dropped into such a position that it struck the operating rods of the facing points leading from the down main line to the down relief line at Longfield Avenue Junction between Ealing Broadway and West Ealing stations. The effect was to open the points underneath the locomotive, causing the train to become completely derailed. It came to rest within 210 yards, with the locomotive on its right side and the first coach still coupled to it, derailed all wheels but upright. The next 5 coaches were zigzagged across all 4 lines and severely damaged. It was here that most of the casualties occurred when a cast steel bogie from the trailing end of the 3rd coach was forced through the body side into compartments at the leading end of the 4th coach. The rear 5 coaches were also derailed but remained upright and sustained only minor damage. London's worst ever peacetime tube crash occurred at 8:45 in the morning of the 28th of February 1975, when a Northern Line train from Drayton Park failed to stop at the Moorgate terminus, killing 42 people and injuring 74. Approximately 300 passengers were on the train. Formed of two 3-car units of 1938 tube stock, on arrival at the station the train failed to slow, passing through the station at 30 to 40 miles per hour before entering the 66 feet long overrun tunnel with a sand drag and hydraulic buffer stop. The sand drag only slowed the train slightly before the train collided heavily with the buffers and then the wall. The leading driving car buckled at 2 points into a V shape, crushed between the wall and the weight of its train piling up behind it. The third car split apart lengthwise and rode over the end of the second car. Both eyewitness and forensic evidence implied that the driver was fully conscious at the point of impact, with his hands firmly on the controls. The official inquiry could come to no conclusion as to why he failed to apply the brakes. The final newsreel film in this collection is from the fatal derailment of the Glasgow to Euston night sleeper train that occurred at Nuneaton at about 2 o'clock in the morning of the 6th of June 1975. Approaching Nuneaton at 80 miles per hour and running some 66 minutes late after having a second Class 86 locomotive attached at Kings Langley, where the train's original engine had broken down, the driver failed to observe a temporary 20 miles per hour speed limit through the station. The excessive speed over a curved section of temporary track derailed the locomotives and all but one of the carriages. The train continued forward for about 340 yards, with coaches slewing sideways and striking line-side structures. 2 passengers and 2 sleeping car attendants were killed in the crash, and another 2 passengers died later in hospital. Another 38 were injured.